Hi, everyone. It's Mark Connellan from the Virtual Cantina Network, and I am joined by a Star Wars legend. This is Lorne Peterson. I'm sure you guys all recognize him. We have had him on the network before and visited us in person last summer during the family vacation. Lorne, how are things going?
Good. I've been to Dallas actually once before, a long time ago. But yeah, we just woke up, had breakfast, and here I am.
So I like that plan.
Yeah.
We're here for, like as always, to celebrate all things Star Wars. We have a nice mix of people, like 35 different actors from across the saga. But you are one of the OGs. You worked on all of the original
OG.
So original gangsters. Means yes. But you've been there from the beginning. So what is it like almost 50 years later, still meeting fans and talking about all things Star Wars?
Well, it's easy to say. It absolutely is amazing that it had legs like that. When we first started making the film, I was asked to just work on a science fiction film in the Valley. But it didn't take too long of seeing the artwork and working. I think I was the 20th employee. You could tell it was something special, and it was going to be successful. As time went on, people would say, "Oh, I never realized that." Most of us realized that it was going to be an interesting film, but there's a lot of difference between making, 10 million back and making 400 million back. It's like a really big difference. It's a big difference. So at the time, it took $11.5 million to do Star Wars with the effects and film.
Love that you remember that specifically.
Yeah. And so if it had made 30-40 million, it would have been considered a really big success. So when it made 400 million, that was like quantum leaps more.
Yeah, and kind of unheard of for any type of movie to have that kind of size and scale.
It was, especially within a short period of time. It was like it was a snowball that never stopped for the year and a half, 2 years. I remember I was invited to the last day that Star Wars showed at the screen over in Oakland, a very special screening, and it was all filled with people in costume, and I had no idea that they were going to chant the whole dialogue. Their part, all the Princess Leia's would chant the Princess Leia's. Darth Vader would chant his.
So it was Rocky Horror before Rocky. Well, I guess not before Rocky Horror, but it was Rocky Horror basically.
It was, yeah. The midnight showings, the parties, the costumes.
So yeah, it was like midnight showings, like Rocky Horror.
Absolutely. And I went to 2 Vinny screenings because every time I had a friend or a relative that was in town, they wanted to go with me to see the film.
Yeah.
So, and the same thing happened with E.T. and up into India, Raiders Lost Ark. And, I was just like, oh, well, I saw it a week ago. I saw it 2 weeks ago. But, it's kids, relatives were their kids that came and all this stuff and wanted to see it and talk about it. And I never regretted any of that kind of stuff. I have, as I say, a million stories, there's a million stories in the big city, and this is just one of them.
Right.
It was a tagline to a television show when I was a kid. The guy would look out over New York, a detective show. There's a million stories in the big city.
I know we've gotten some of yours, but is there anything? I mean, I'm looking at the table and I'm seeing you worked on the Millennium Falcon. You worked on the Sandcrawler, which that might be one of my favorite photos of.
Yeah, this is the re-release of Star Wars, and George was a little bit satisfied that shot in the desert wasn't as dynamic as he wanted. He really wanted an overhead looming shot.
Okay, and
I think that's the most successful remake of the shot. Other shots, and adding the digital dewbacks and things like that. But granted, a baby has to crawl before it can walk, and that's what George Lucas was doing. He was having you guys pay for the experiment of having the baby start to walk.
I funded Phantom Menace by going to see Special Edition A New Hope, for sure. We all did. It's interesting because you guys were doing groundbreaking special effects and technology in 1977. And I feel like the discourse around the prequels is that they were doing groundbreaking special effects in 1999. And people forget that you had already been doing that 20 years prior, just in a different execution. Like a lot of this is very practical. I see the sets, I see the models, the scales. This one right here of you like sticking out over here from inside the space slug. It's amazing. Yeah, these are incredible.
You know what? Although as years went by, the model shop did more dynamic shots. It's like the eruption of the ground in the plaza for War of the Worlds, the collapse of Monument Valley. Big sets which had action and had to do things. And CG eventually took over making things like this. At one time, the model shop would make them and hand to them unpainted. They would digitize them, hand them back to us. We'd do paint jobs. Then they would record that paint job and then use make sticky, I think, to wrap around the model. Well, that eventually fell by the wayside also. And the model shop started to do these action shots, that involved levers and pulleys and machines and pneumatic cylinders and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then I think Mustafar was, it was bigger than, not quite as big as a full tennis court, if you squared that out. So it was a big set, and it cost like what a Ferrari would.
Yeah.
An inexpensive Ferrari.
Yeah.
And then I use the prices of cars when people ask, well, how much did that cost to make? I say, oh, that was a Toyota, reasonable price Toyota.
And in the beginning, there must have been foam and other lightweight and sort of general textile kind of production pieces. By the time you get to the prequels, there's customized and we're going to layer in the effects. It's going to be a different execution.
Yeah, we had a warehouse upstairs. We had various shipping containers that had supplies that we knew that we would need. And after 10 years, we had zillions of obscure things. And I used to say that we even had a camel eyebrows somewhere in a box, that I'd saved. And I knew where
from Raiders.
I knew where aisle number 4 was, shelf number 3, in the back, where those camel eyebrows were.
Yeah.
And, but we had giant boxes of moth-eaten turkey feathers for suspension in water if they wanted particles for, what project was that? Poltergeist, maybe they inside the water. Maybe it was also Hunt for Red October or something like that. But trying to find a neutral, I was experimenting with things. Well, what would be neutral density of material that I could get? And it was like, I originally would take turkey feathers and run them through a blender. And I went to
everything about that sentence is so insane. He did say turkey feathers through a blender, people.
So I got in touch with this guy that ran a feather supply company in the middle of the state. And he said, oh God, if you'd only called like a year ago, I had these boxes of turkey feathers, but moths had gotten into them and they just chewed them up. And I said, is it this debris all over the place? He said, oh yeah, when you open them up. I said,
we'll take it.
We're buying them.
That's the beauty of filmmaking, right? I feel like it's a lot of test and learn. It's a lot of roll with the punches. It's a lot of figure it out as you go. And you inhabit that spirit the same way that George infused that into all of the movies.
Yeah, I used to read, one of my jobs was that I took on really myself is finding materials, unusual materials. And one time I was reading through a magazine. I was probably in an office waiting, an engineer's office to ask questions. And he had an engineering magazine. And there was a thing about cleaning up waste, various waste, with things that they would use to clean up the waste. And one of them was called corncob fractions. And I was like, wow, I wonder what corncob fractions are.
That is. Yeah.
And so what it is it's ground up corn cobs, which you don't have after the pigs have eaten the corn or they strip the corn off. There was no use for them. Corn cob pipe, but nobody uses those anymore. And so these big bags would come, of this incredibly light off-white material, and I use that to mix in with the the soil of things like the crash in Men in Black. To make a soil less dense, so use vermiculite, peat moss, and corncob factions, and then I used a little brown powders to make it brown, and so when the ship it took the dirt and tossed it upwards. If you'd really use dirt at that scale, it would just ruin the model, crash the model. So all of a sudden, corncob factions became part of our menu, our palette.
That's crazy. I love that.
Yeah.
Filmmaking is such an interesting art form because there's some science, there's a lot of test and learn, there's a lot of figuring it out. And you've worked on so many interesting executions that, like, I'm looking again at this picture of you inside the space slug and how to make that scale work. I'm sure you guys did a lot of trying and failing and then getting it right.
Not much failing. When so much money is at stake, and people become very skilled, And I used to tell people, like, if you're trying to solve a problem, that think of it this way. Yes, you could go into San Francisco, you could go to a hardware store, you could do all this stuff. You could phone up New York and you could solve a problem. But think of it more like, what could I do in 100 feet radius? The answer to the problem is somewhere within that radius, or 300 feet, or something like that. Is start thinking of it that way, because you need to do it. Needs to happen right away. And that's a lot of times somebody would come to you and say, we have to eliminate the footprints on this set and we don't want anybody to walk on it. We need to have, what can you do? And at that time I had a poke pole, a big long for fishing. You know what a poke pole is? It goes out really far. I had a whole drawer full of balloons, everything from condoms to weather balloons. Over the years I collected balloons. And I blew up a weather balloon about 3 feet, attached it to the poke pole, and then went to the sand set and got rid of the footprints from the camera's point of view. It just mushed over them, and it was done in half an hour, from making
the ingenuity is what really drives the production.
Yeah, it is, because people ask you to do things, and they don't mean like in a week.
Yeah. There's no such thing as a week in show business, that's for sure. And I work in consumer products still. I'm still a licensee for Star Wars. I was with Topps, where I brought you to Celebration in 2019 for Chicago.
I touch with Topps to see about Japan or something like that, and it just didn't work to get it.
So I don't think Topps booked Japan, but it was a different group. They had the license from like 2017 to 2021 or 22, but different group now. But I'm still working as a licensee doing replica helmets and stuff. And it's so fun because, like, I get to actually use a lot of assets and references from the original movies. We just did a Darth Vader.
I want the address email address for Corncob Faction?
Without a doubt. We were going to put that in our next helmet. Coming soon, it'll be the Lorne Peterson special. But in all seriousness, this has been amazing. You've given us so many great stories, and we've been a big fan of yours, Pod the Network, for a while. And thank you for hopping in and meeting us and everything. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Where can people? We love it. Where can
over air conditioned is what I really mean.
You know what? It is nice and cool in here. Unlike the 112 degrees outside in Texas, it is cool, calm, and collected here in the actual convention center. So, Lorne, where can people find you online? Are you on Facebook?
I am, but you can imagine if I opened the dam up on that matter.
Yeah.
If I've never met the person and know, at least I just can't do it. People still find ways to get to me, and I answer.
Star Wars fans will find you.
What's that?
Star Wars fans will find you.
I answer. People will ask me obscure questions. If it's silly questions like, "What's your favorite model?" But if someone comes up and it says, I always wondered about blah 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 blah. It said I will, by one finger type this and come up, with stories for people. But I'm not saying open the floodgates or anything like that.
We will keep your privacy protected. But in the meantime, you can follow us on Facebook. So the Virtual Cantina, our page is Star Wars Celebration Los Angeles 2027. We are on the cusp of 100,000 members. So be sure to share the page, tell your friends, bother Lorne. It'll be a good time. But thank you, everyone, for joining us. Follow our social media throughout the show here at Rebel Scum Con. And as always, I feel like you should say it with me. The big catchphrase, may the force be with you. Since you were there from the beginning, that'll be our outro.
Yeah, I was there at the manger, actually, when the Star Wars child was born.
Excellent. That's what I like to hear. All right, let's do it together. 1, 2, 3. May the force be with you.